Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. I welcome you all to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis. Before we begin, a couple of important reminders. As you know, we are back with a new initiative that is the big news. Every day at 2 p.m. on our YouTube channel, we will be discussing the big news for the day. That is one topic that has been in the news from the UPSC point of view. We'll be discussing that in detail to give you all the perspectives related to that particular topic. Don't forget to join in for that every single day at 2 p.m. Also, tonight we have the next episode of International Relations this week. This will be on our YouTube channel at 8 p.m. Don't forget to catch that as well. As you know, in this series, we discuss the most important news regarding international relations that were covered in the newspapers this entire week. Now, let's begin with the first article written by retired Air Vice Marshal Manmohan Bahadur. He says that on the 60th anniversary of the 1962 India-China War, this is a time to look back at that war and learn the lessons that we have to take from that war. He says that if you look at the history of India, we celebrate the wars that we have won. We celebrate and observe the anniversary of 1965 war, the 1971 war, the Kargil war, and all of the conflicts that we had with Pakistan. However, the one war that we ignore because we lost that war badly was the 1962 war. That was a war that began on 20th October 1962. Now, India of 1962 and India of 2022 are not the same. We are not in the same situation as we were in 1962. However, as per the author, we cannot ignore the weaknesses that we showed in the 1962 war. Just like any great country, we must also learn lessons from our mistakes so that they are not repeated in the future. In this article, he points out towards certain questions and lessons that we can take from the 1962 war if you look back. Now, there were various reasons why India performed badly in the 1962 war. The first, we thought that international standing, international prestige of our leader would be in proportion to the country's military power, which was not the case. Jawaharlal Nehru, when India had actually become independent, was one of the tallest leaders in the world and was seen as a representative of not just India but of many developing nations around the world. Whenever he spoke, even in the developed nations, the people used to listen very carefully. Thus, it was assumed that the country which he belonged to, that is India, would also have the power and the prestige to back up his international stature. But that was not the case. Even though he was going from country to country making great speeches, people were listening to him, but in reality, he did not pay a lot of attention to the Indian army at that point of time. The Indian army was ill prepared and ill equipped to face the war against China, especially because that was the first ever war that was fought at such high altitudes in such difficult climatic conditions. This is the first lesson. That is, don't just look outwards to impress the other nations. We must also ensure that our navy, our army, our air force are well equipped to handle any kind of pressure that they are put under. Second, at that point of time, we really underestimated the strength of the Indian Air Force. Now, in the 1962 war, the Indian Air Force were only used for transportation purposes. They were carrying goods, they were taking back the soldiers, they were bringing more soldiers. However, we never used any attacking options from the Indian Air Force. Many experts say that if that would have been the case, maybe the result of the war would have been different. The reason being that China at that point of time did not really have any aircraft that could work at such high altitudes, and India could have had a great advantage then, but for some reason we did not have enough confidence in our own attacking capabilities of the Indian Air Force. Third, the army's top leadership was not strong enough to stand against the political interference. Now, the 1962 war is remembered for a lot of reasons. The one controversial reason for which it is remembered was of the defense minister that we had at that point of time, that is Mr. V.K. Krishna Menon. Now, Mr. V.K. Krishna Menon was a very powerful leader at that time. Many people say he was next to just Jawaharlal Nehru and was considered as the second most powerful person in the country. There were a lot of criticism of the way that he was actually running the defense ministry. He was not really focused on the modernization of the armed forces. Despite a lot of criticism, Jawaharlal Nehru did not remove him. He was a defense minister when the war had started. His performance and his inputs during the war were considered to be the biggest reason why India performed badly in the war. So much so that in the middle of the war, when the war had not even ended, he was removed from his position under a lot of pressure, and YB Chavan was named as the new defense minister. With the introduction of YB Chavan in the defense ministry, the era of modernization of the Indian armed forces began. That is why there was a drastic change between 1962 and 1965 in between the two wars. It was because YB Chavan, as the defense minister, had made drastic changes in the Indian defense forces. But VK Krishna Menon and his position is also criticized for the role in the 1962 war. So the third reason is that despite bad orders given by the defense minister, the top army leadership was just not in a position to question that. The fourth important point, while the army Jawans played a stellar role, the young co-pilots of the Indian Air Force played a stellar role in taking over the helicopters used for transportation so that their seniors could rest. On the other hand, the senior military leadership was not really able to display the kind of leadership that was expected. All these lessons have to be learned, but they can only be learned if we have an open debate about it. The author says it is always good to appreciate your successes and your wins, but we must never forget the weaknesses and the defeats that we face, because this is what actually allows us to learn for the future. Now, he also says that the government should also open up the documents about the war. Most of the 1962 war related documents are still kept a secret by the government and they have not been made public. One of the biggest of those documents is something called the Henderson Brooks Bhagat report. Now, what this is exactly? So, after the war got over, there was an official report published by two officers of the Indian Army. They were Lieutenant General Henderson Brooks and Brigadier General Premindra Singh Bhagat. This became the Henderson Brooks Bhagat report. Now, this report talked about who exactly are the people who are responsible for India's defeat. Now, because the government at that point of time did not like the report, it kept it a secret, and it is actually an official secret even today. However, a few years back, what happened was that some journalists in Australia actually got hold of that report and they posted half of the report online, which everyone got to see for few days before it was banned again by the government. This report, if you actually see the pages that were published, puts blame on certain people. The first name that they take is of VK Krishna Menon, that is the defense minister. They also blame the top leadership of the Indian Armed Forces, including the people who were leading the army. The report also puts blame on India's foreign secretary. However, the report was silent on the role of the Prime Minister. But even today, the government has not made the report public. That is the Henderson Brooks Bhagat report. So the author is saying that reports such as these should come to light so that the people can at least understand what happened at the time of the war and who was responsible. As you know, the war commenced on October 20th, 1962, and it ended with China unilaterally declaring ceasefire, unilaterally saying that okay, now we don't want to fight any further, and on November 21, 1962, they unilaterally said that okay, we are now going back, we have taught the lesson that we had wanted to teach. This is one of the saddest chapters of Indian contemporary history and must be taken up for further discussion. The next article that we have here again takes us back to what happened in Gambia and the relation with respect to India and the Indian pharmaceutical industry. As you know, in the African nation of Gambia, multiple children lost their lives. After the discussion and the investigation, it was found out that the relation of all these children is with cough syrups that were manufactured in India by an Indian pharmaceutical company. Now, we have discussed this topic earlier as well. Now, the report is that the number of children who have lost their life, their number has increased to 69 now. Now, I'm sure all of you have read this earlier, but just to remind you, the issue is 69 children in Gambia have lost their life. After the investigation started, it was found out that the common connection in all these 69 children is that they consumed 4 cough syrup variants that were manufactured by Maiden Pharmaceutical Limited, that is an Indian company based out of Haryana. The WHO found out that all these syrups contained unacceptable amounts of two contaminants, that is diethylene glycol and ethylene glycol. Now, the interesting part is that this company does not sell its medicines in India. They manufacture them in India, but it is only for export to other nations, including Gambia. WHO says that diethylene glycol and ethylene glycol are toxic to humans when they are consumed and can prove to be fatal. Both of these are illegal adulterants but are used as solvents in liquid medications such as syrups. In fact, they are used to provide a liquid base to non-water soluble paracetamols and acetaminophen. These also play the role of preservatives, sweeteners, and antimicrobial agents. Now, the sad and the unfortunate part is that this is not the first time that such kind of an incident has happened around the world. This has happened in other countries, including in India, where children have lost their lives. Now, making medicines for children, especially, is extremely tricky, and that is why there are a lot of licenses, regulations, permissions that are involved for any company that has ventured into this field. The WHO is now saying that the company did not follow the prescribed procedure for making these medicines. WHO as well as India's Central Drug Standard Control Organization have launched investigations and they are looking into how exactly did this happen. Now there are various ways to look at this particular news. One, it is extremely unfortunate. Any children should not have died because of consuming a medicine. Yes, the Indian pharmaceutical company in this case is under question. Also, this is not the first time that such a case has come against this pharmaceutical industry. On the other hand, blaming the entire Indian pharmaceutical sector for this would also not be good because the Indian CDSCO does provide licenses to those companies who want to export their medicines. Also, when the medicines are exported, the importing nation, which will be Gambia in this case, they also do their own set of tests and regulations before allowing any of these medicines to be consumed. The other side of the story is imagine if something like this would have happened in a developed nation. Imagine any medicine from India going to a developed nation in Europe or USA would have resulted in such an incident. Now just imagine what would have been the outcome of that and compare that to what is happening right now. This is sad but true that Africa still remains one of the most highly neglected continents in the entire world, which is why this news has not become as big as it should have. This also brings into question the impact on Indian pharmaceutical industry. As you know, whenever the government of India tries to sign a free trade agreement with any nation, we focus on having increased access to their market for our pharmaceutical products. That is because India is a pharmacy of the entire world and is the third largest pharmaceutical industry by volume in the entire world. In fact, India has exported pharmaceutical products worth 1,75,000 crore in the last financial year, which includes mainly the generic drugs which are at low cost and they are exported to most nations in Africa and in South Asia as well. India, however, imports the products which are used to make these drugs, which are called API. These are mostly imported from nations such as China. The Economic Survey of 2021 said that the potential of Indian pharmaceutical industry is much higher as compared to the current level. It can reach 120 to 130 billion dollars by 2030. However, incidents such as these are a great setback to the Indian pharmaceutical industry and thus there has to be a thorough probe of why exactly did this happen and who exactly is responsible for this. The next article that we have here is about the Prime Minister's speech recently on the occasion of the General Assembly meeting of Interpol that was held in India. As you know, Interpol's General Assembly meet is being held in Delhi right now as we are discussing this. Prime Minister Modi was there for the inaugural address in this particular event. In this address, he said that the entire world right now is facing the issue of global crime. Mainly, he highlighted how cyber threats and online threats have become a problem not just for India but nations across the world. He said that the only way possible to ensure that these kind of threats are curtailed is global cooperation. In fact, he said that global cooperation for local welfare is our call. Now, the reason why we are discussing this article is these kind of one-line quotations from the Prime Minister can become extremely handy while you're writing the mains answer. So if you're writing a mains answer with regards to, let's say, global cooperation for cyber terrorism, etc., these kind of quotes can be used, where you can mention that the Prime Minister of India says that global cooperation for local welfare is our call, and this is what the nations across the world should follow. So these one-line quotes have become extremely important. Earlier also we had discussed about the issue of cyber crimes in India that are increasing not just in India but in nations across the world. As more and more people are embracing technology, as more and more people have personal laptops, mobile phones, internet connections, it is very obvious that the number of cyber crimes will also increase. These cyber crimes are of various categories. They can be online bullying, they can also be fudging of data, they can be stealing of information, stealing of financial data, so on and so forth. In fact, the National Crime Record Bureau says that cyber crimes in India have increased by 6% in a year in 2021, with Telangana topping the list. Also in 2022, the number is only increasing. 2 months of 2022 saw more cybercrime than the entire year of 2018, and it will only increase as the technology becomes far more sophisticated, the number of mobile devices in our hands increase, it will only become worse, and the nations have to stay one step ahead. Now, what the nations have done is there is something called the Budapest Convention on Cybersecurity, where nations have come together to seek cooperation with each other to address cyber crimes over the internet mainly. Now, the interesting part is that India is not a part of this convention. We have not ratified it for various reasons. India says that number one, when this convention was being formulated, India was not a party to this meeting, so our input was not taken. Secondly, we also say that sharing information with other nations about cybercrimes in India or people's identity is not really safe for India's own sovereignty and internal security. So we don't trust that. India is concerned that data sharing will lead to problems that are our own and no one else will come to help us. It's not that India is not in favor of international cooperation in these kind of issues, but we know that the Western nations alone should not make protocol for this and force other nations such as India to sign such conventions. The next article that we have here is with respect to what happened in Kerala recently. Recently, the Kerala governor, Mr. Arif Mohammad Khan, made a statement that if any minister does something that damages the prestige of the office of the governor, or any minister that is actually lowering the dignity of the governor's office, the governor says that he has the power to remove them from their post as well. Now, this has led to a lot of debate. I'm sure in Indian polity also you would have read that the governor, in matters of dismissing any minister, has to abide by the aid and advice of the chief minister only. The governor may dismiss ministers, that is only when the government is not in majority. But when it's a government of complete majority, the governor cannot on its own will dismiss any of the ministers. This is why this has again come in the question. Article 164 of the Constitution says that the Chief Minister shall be appointed by the Governor and other ministers shall be appointed by the Governor on the Chief Minister's advice. Also, the ministers hold the office till the pleasure of the Governor. However, the pleasure of the Governor again does not mean that the Governor has a free will that he can remove the ministers whenever he wants. It has to be interpreted in a manner that the pleasure of the Governor actually means the pleasure of the Chief Minister, unless the government itself has lost the majority. But as long as the government is in the majority, the governor does not have the power to take such random decisions. Now, the reason behind this confrontation may be that recently the Kerala legislature had passed a law called the Kerala University Law Amendment Bill of 2022. The governor has not really been in favor of signing of this bill. As you know, governor is also given the position of chancellor of many universities in the state. The governor thinks that this kind of a bill will reduce his powers and he does not want to sign on this kind of a bill. Maybe this is the reason why the governor of Kerala has given such a statement. However, even if you look at many commissions that have been formed on this regard, like the Panchi Commission that reviewed the center state elections, they also recommended that the governor should not be given the role of the chancellor. And even if they are given the role of the chancellor, the reality is that the powers of the chancellor, what can the chancellor do, what can the chancellor can't do, all of these are to be decided by the state legislature only. So governor, even though he may be the chancellor of the state universities, does not have a free hand at running the universities in whatever way he or she wants. This is what the governor must understand. I also wanted to share with you the other recommendations given by the Panchi Commission. Since this is an extremely relevant topic for Indian polity, it has been asked multiple times in the mains examination as well. Panchi Commission, as you know, just like the Sarkariya Commission, is a commission formed to recommend how to improve the center state relations. Most of its recommendations have not been accepted, but some of them are accepted by the government from time to time. For example, the Commission said that the governors should be given a 5-year term and they should not just be randomly removed by the President. If they are to be removed, the government should follow the procedure of impeachment similar to that of the President of India. Also, the union should not assert its supremacy every single time on the state, and the state should be given their own freedom to work on their own matters. While appointing the governor, these things should be kept in mind. The person should be from outside the state. This is a point which is usually followed by most of the governments. The person should have eminence in some walk of life. The person should not be an active figure in local politics. This is also something that the governments don't abide by. And also, the person should not be connected with politics in the recent past. The government of the state should also be given a fixed tenure, and the threat of president rule should not be used to remove the state governments whenever the union government wants. The governor should also insist on the chief minister to prove his majority, before which the chief minister can take oath. All these are recommendations given by the Panchi Commission. As you can see, some of them have been taken seriously while others have been ignored by the union governments from time to time. The next article that we have here is about the International Solar Alliance that recently had its General Assembly meeting. In the General Assembly meeting, the International Solar Alliance has approved something called the Solar Facility, which is a payment guarantee mechanism to ensure that more investments come into solar projects through Solar Payment Guarantee Fund and a Solar Insurance Fund. As you know, International Solar Alliance started as a group of nations which are between the two tropics. These are those nations which do receive abundant amount of sunlight throughout the year, and they have the potential to convert that sunlight into various forms of energy so that the nations can move towards renewable form of energy. As you know, this came up through an initiative by India and France at the Paris Climate Change Summit. Since then, the ISA has had multiple meetings, although they have not really been able to start up any big scale project across the world. The one thing that they are lacking is the funding capacity. Now, as you know, setting up any huge project for solar power requires a good amount of capital. They also have been trying to attract private capital into markets in Africa mainly, where the private sector might not have a great rate of return. That is why the ISA is now trying to bring up new sources of investment. The mission of the alliance is to have at least $1 trillion of funding in solar power by 2030, so that the nations around the world, especially the African nations, can set up more projects in the field of solar power. Let me give you some examples of the projects that the ISA has started. As I said earlier, ISA started as a group of nations that are between the two tropics. However, later on, do remember, the membership of ISA is now open to any nation across the world which is a member of the UN. So now it is not that only the tropical nations can become a part of it. Now any nation can become a part of it. And that is why ISA now has over 100 nations, although they have not been able to fulfill any concrete aims as such. Now, a couple of projects that they have started are One Sun, One World, One Grid. It's a framework for facilitating global cooperation in terms of renewable energy resources that are mainly dependent on solar energy. The vision is that the sun never sets, and at some point of time in some geographical location globally there will always be the sun, and thus there is always a capacity to actually generate energy from the sun. The ISA also has a Solar Technology and Application Resource Center that has been developed to give training to people to set up these kind of solar power projects, to research and innovate, to bring in new energy, to share knowledge about how can we make the best use of the solar energy throughout the entire world. These are just some of the initiatives that the ISA has started. As you know, ISA is headquartered in Gurugram in India. This is the first international organization to have its headquarters in India. As I said earlier, now all members of the UN are free to join the International Solar Alliance. It's not just the nations that are present between the two tropics. India has contributed immensely to the formation of ISA, including giving 5 acres of land in Gurugram next to the National Institute of Solar Energy to set up the headquarters of the ISA. However, how much does the ISA actually change the lives of the people in solar nations, and How much energy change does it actually bring in the African nation still remains to be seen. These are the important articles on the Hindu newspaper today. Now, a couple of practice questions. Number one, unless a robust financing route is put into place, any project of the International Solar Alliance would fail to fulfill its objective. Critically analyze. Second, cyber threats have emerged as the biggest threat by non state actors in the recent times. How is the Indian government dealing with such issues? Both the questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video. Have a good day ahead.